Hey everyone, welcome back to T Accounts. So in this video, we'll be solving a past paper question related to errors affecting and not affecting trial balance. And the question that we are doing is from June 2020, paper 21, question number 2, right? So the question says, MA provided the following balances from his books at 31st March 2020. So the year end is 31st March 2020, right? Now, then we are given with a list of balances. Let's see the requirements first. In part A, we are required to prepare the trial balance, right, at the same date 31st March 2020, and also to show the difference in the trial balance totals as a suspense account balance. So this means that the account balances given to us will not make the trial balance naturally. Rather, we will be required to insert a suspense account balance in the end of the trial balance, right? Then in the next part, we are required to show the correcting entries, as then the errors would have been discovered. So we have to make the correcting entries, and lastly we are required to prepare the suspense account as well, right? So let's begin, and let's start with identifying that which account balance will go on the debit side of the trial balance and which will go in the credit side. So let's mark accordingly. Capital, we know that capital has a credit nature, so it will be on the credit side. 10369 will be written on the credit side of the trial balance. Then we have drawings. So drawings, we know that drawings have a debit nature. It is a contra capital account, so it will be shown on the debit side. Then equipment at cost, non-current assets, they all have debit balances, but provision for depreciation being a contra asset account, as it reduces the value of the non-current asset, this will go on the credit side. Inventory at 1st April 2019. So this is what? This is the opening inventory. Opening inventory becomes part of the trial balance, and this will also be shown on the debit side since it is a current asset. If we would have been given the closing inventory, then we know that closing inventory does not become part of trial balance. It is written at the end of the trial balance after the preparation of trial balance, after the totals in the adjustments, right? But this is opening inventory, so this will go on the debit side. Then we have trade receivables, again an asset, debit side. Bank overdraft, a current liability, this will go on the credit side. Same goes for trade payables, current liability, this will also go on the credit side. Then we have sales. So sales being an income will be shown on the credit side of the trial balance. Then we have purchases. So purchases increases our inventory, it is also a type of expense. This will go on the debit side. However, purchases returns reduce the value of our inventory, so this will be shown on the credit part of the trial balance. Then carriage inwards being an expense will go on the debit side. However, discount received is an income, and same goes for commission receivable, both are income, so incomes are shown on the credit side of the trial balance. And lastly, we have two expenses, rent and insurance and office expenses, they both will go on the debit side of the trial balance. So the rule is simple, all the assets and all the expenses, and same goes for the contra capital drawings account, they go on the debit side, but all the incomes and all the liabilities, they become part of your credit side of the trial balance, right? Same goes for capital as well, and any contra asset account. So let's start writing these amounts in the space given to us. Alright, so after writing the amounts on the debit and credit side, our totals are, the debit side totals 49,650, however the credit side totals 50,019. So this means that the totals would be the bigger figure, of course, 50,019. This means that I will be writing the suspense account balance on which side? On the debit side, right? And the difference would be 50,019 less 49,650, that would be 369, a shortage on the debit side of the trial balance of 369, right? So make sure that if you are attempting such part in the exam, you keep crossing or you just keep taking the amounts that you have used already in the trial balance, so that you don't end up repeating or just taking a wrong figure for any account balance. So we are done with the first part. Let's move to the next part. It says MA later discovered several errors had been made in the accounting records. Of course, that is why the trial balance did not balance and we had to insert the suspense account. Then we are asked to complete the table to show the entries required to correct each error. The first one has been completed as an example. Okay. So the first one was no entry had been made for cash sales 60. Okay, so this is an example of an error of omission. You remember, an error of omission was when the transaction is not at all recorded in the books, either the debit side or the credit side, not at all recorded. So this error does not affect the balancing of trial balance, right? We know that not all the errors in the exam question will be affecting trial balance, or all the errors that won't be affecting the trial balance. We will be given with a mix of both of these types of errors, right? So how will we correct an error of omission? Just like how the transaction should have been originally recorded. Since cash sales were not recorded, so now in order to correct this error, we will be debiting cash by 60 and crediting sales by 60. Now let's move to the second example. It says office expenses 240 had been credited to the wages account and no debit entry had been made. All right. So office expenses 240 had been credited to the wages account. Wages account should not have been used in order to record this transaction. However, it has been incorrectly credited. So first of all, in order to eliminate the effect of the wrong treatment from the wrong account, we now have to debit wages. So wages will now be debited by the original value 240. This will reverse the effect of the error on its credit side. Then it also says that no debit entry had been made, so office expenses should have been debited, right? So now we will be debiting office expenses by 240 as well, right? So wages will be debited to eliminate the effect of the wrong entry, and then office expenses will be debited as well to record the transaction, the actual transaction, right? And now in order to complete the double entry, we will have to write something on the credit side as well with the totals, of course, to balance the double entry, right? So the totals would be 480, and which account will be used to complete the double entry? My suspense account, right? Since there was no problem on the credit side of the transaction, if office expenses are being paid through cash and bank, cash or bank, so that part has been correctly recorded on the credit side. That is why we are now using suspense account to complete the correcting entry. Now the third one says the purchases journal total for March 2020 was 2165. Very good. This amount was incorrectly recorded in the purchases account as 2651. Okay, so we know that all the day books totals are transferred in their respective T accounts in the general ledger, right, for purchases, returns and sales, returns inwards and outwards both. So the actual value was 2165. However, we carried it forward and recorded it on the debit side of the purchases account. Why debit side? Because purchases has a debit nature. So we debited how much? 2651, an increased figure. We have overstated the purchases account balance by how much? By the difference 2651 less 2165, that would be 486. By 486, purchases account has been overstated. Now in order to bring this value 2651 to 2165, I now have to credit my purchases account, right? Right now it is overstated by how much? By the difference 486. More has been recorded on the debit side. So now to correct this error, I will be crediting purchases by 486, and again, since the problem is just in one account, so I will be debiting suspense account to complete the double entry by 486, right? Moving on to the next error, error number 4 says an insurance payment 375 had been correctly recorded in the cash book, right? So what is the double entry? Insurance expense should be debited and cash book credited, and cash book has been correctly credited, but no other entry had been made. No other entry means we have not recorded the debit side of the double entry. So, this means that insurance is not debited. So, in order to correct this error, we will now be debiting insurance by 375, simple. And since cash book has been correctly credited, so again suspense account will be used to complete the double entry. This was an example of a single entry. We recorded the credit side but not the debit side. Now, the last error says the purchase of equipment, non-current asset 800 was correctly recorded in the cash book, right. So, the purchase was financed through cash or bank and cash book has been correctly credited, right. Purchase of equipment, the equipment account should have been debited, but what has happened, but debited to the office expenses account. Office expenses, we know an expense, however, this was a non-current asset. So, instead of debiting equipment account, I debited my office expenses account. So, first of all, I have to remove this error from my office expenses account by crediting or by debiting it? By crediting office expenses. The amount is 800, and since equipment has not been debited at all, so equipment will now be debited to record the transaction as it should have been recorded. You remember what type of error is this? When instead of recording a transaction in a non-current asset account, you end up recording it in an expense account. When the nature of the accounts are different, you remember what type of error that was? This was an example of an error of principle, right. If the nature of the accounts, if the class of accounts are different, that is error of principle. If the class of accounts are same, that is an error of commission. So, we are done with the second part as well. Now, let us move to our last part, which says prepare the suspense account and start with the difference on the trial balance prepared in part A, right. So, the difference was on the debit side amounting to 369, and it also says that balance or total the account as necessary. So, you remember that we have already studied this, that ideally the suspense account should balance after correcting all the errors, but if it does not balance and it has a credit balance, that is balance brought down falling on the credit side, then it will be shown as a current liability in the SOFP, or vice versa. If the brought down balance falls on the debit side, that will be shown as a current asset. So, the question is asking you to do any of the two possibilities, either balance it or total it, either extract the balance CD or just total it. Total means that there will remain no balance, that there are no further errors in your T accounts, right. So, we will start with the balance as a difference as per the trial balance, which was on the debit side. The year is 2020, I guess, and the month is March 31st. The month is, yes, 31st March 2020. Difference as per trial balance 369 on the debit side. Then we know that how do we prepare a suspense account? We will look for all the entries which were corrected using the suspense account only, right. So, error number 1 does not involve suspense account. Why? Because this was an error which does not affect the balancing of trial balance, so it won't be used to make an entry in the suspense account. However, error number 2 required an entry in the suspense account. Same goes for error number 3 and error number 4 as well. So, these 3 will be used to complete the suspense account. In error number 2, we are crediting suspense account because of these two accounts. So, wages and office expenses will be written on the credit side of the suspense account, right. Next entry is suspense account is being debited by 486 because of purchases. Why? Because purchases were overstated, you remember. So, now we are debiting suspense account by 486 because of purchases, same date March 31st. And lastly, error number 4, in suspense account is being credited by 375 because of insurance. So, we are done with all the entries that pass through our suspense account. Now, we just have to find out whether this is balancing or whether we have to just total it. So, 240 plus 240 plus 375 would be 855, and the same total on for the debit side as well, that is 855. So this means that there are no further errors which are not yet identified by the business, and we have correctly corrected all the errors in the accounts. That is why our suspense account is balancing. There remains no balance in the end. So this is how you will be solving your question in the exam as well, that some entries will pass through the suspense account, some won't pass through the suspense account, and then you might be required to prepare the suspense account as well. So that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one with another question.